It's here. I don't know where, I don't know how, but it's here. It's inside the house. I've done everything. I've called Todd, I've called Howard, I even called a goddamn exorcist. None of them believed me. None of them so much as offered to help. Now it's Halloween and it's stronger than ever. I can feel it, moving through the house, like a great darkness suffocating the light from everything. It's already taken my business partners, John and Erica. It's already taken so many others. I'm upstairs, in my bedroom closet. I've been here for 3 hours now, and I'll be here for 3 more if that's what it takes. I don't know if the thing hates the sun, but it never bothered me during the day. Only at night, always at night. There's a creak and a groan outside, on the steps, and I feel the house tremble as something monstrous moves through it. My breath hitches in my chest, and I remind myself to be still, to be quiet. I just need to make it until sunrise, just a little longer. Then, the voice follows, low, raspy, and inhuman.
So many lives, and so little time.
It's singing a song, but the tune is broken. Each word scrapes along my ears like a razor blade, cutting deep into my mind and pulling back memories. It sang before it took John. It was only a single word, then.
Coming.
It had hummed, and we had all just thought we were hearing things. Now John's everywhere. There are pieces of him littered throughout the house, fingers and toes, and intestines and eyes. I weep silently into my hands, and I can smell John's blood on them. I can hear his screams. I can taste my cowardice for not doing more to help him, for not even trying.
Oh, how good it'll feel to finally go.
The thing sings. I wince in pain at every word. God damn, it hurts to listen to it. Warmth flows from my ears, and I realize they're bleeding.
Just one more, and then the song ends.
I gasp in agony as more memories tear themselves from my mind. Erica. Her and I had separated in the panic of John's death. I had run up here, trying to call the police, but my phone was haywire. That's when I heard it come for her in the basement. The house creaked and groaned with the creature's every step.
One more will do.
It had sung, descending the basement stairs.
One more makes 2.
I only heard her scream for a moment, and then it faded to silence. Until the thing laughed, guttural and monstrous. It echoed throughout the house, shaking the foundations and rattling the old wooden frame. It laughed and it laughed.
All that we need, all that we eat, all hail the coming of All Hallows Eve.
Now it's moving toward me. It's getting closer. I can feel its every step, its every movement. It passes through the house with tremors of violence.
Just one more.
It sings again.
And then the song ends.
It's outside the bedroom now, and my ears are bleeding badly. I can't take it anymore. I can't take the sound. I clamp my eyes shut, trying to ignore the agony of its voice, trying to ignore the panic rioting in my body. The floorboards creak outside the closet, and I smell something rotten, vile, and grotesque. Something dead. There's a low groan as the closet door slides open.
Looky, looky.
It sings, discordant, tuneless.
Wouldn't you like to see something spooky?
I don't look. Agony tears through my eyes. They're being split open from the inside out, and blood is pouring from my head in a river down my jaw. I whimper, and something leans close to me. The smell of rot is nearly unbearable now, and I gag and retch, but I refuse to open my eyes. I can't. If I see it, then it's real. If I see it, then I die. Something grips my wrist, something cold and damp and loose with flesh. It pulls me from the closet, and I howl in terror and fear. It's taking me somewhere. Please, I sputter, please don't. My leg creaks as it drags me down the steps, and I scream. My eyes are clamped shut, but I feel myself moving through pieces of John as the creature pulls me through the house. Finally, it stops. I'm hyperventilating now, my chest rising and falling in rapid succession. No, 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 I mutter again and again.
Yes,
It says, and this time it isn't singing. It tosses me by my arm, and I feel my shoulder snap backwards out of its socket. I tumble down the old wooden stairs, my head smashing against the steps, my wrist snapping in half as I finally collide against the landing. I groan, tears and blood streaming down my face.
Looky, looky.
It sings, though its voice is now guttural and horrible. It grabs me by the back of my hair, pulls my head up, and reaches its fingers down to my eyelids.
Would you like to see something spooky?
It pulls them open, and I see our studio. Our camera is pointing toward the cages, 10 of them, each filled with pieces of the children, each a tapestry. The light in the basement is dim, but I can see Sally's witch hat, still tied to her head. I can see Michael's werewolf paw, still on his dismembered hand. I lick my lips. There, in the back, is Yonda's Cinderella costume, the glass slipper still upon one of her feet. The thing throws me forward, and I crash against the steel bars of the cage. When I look up in a daze, I see Erica's corpse. My dear filmmaker, mutilated and cut into pieces. Her eyes are missing, and her hand is stuffed halfway down her throat. I lean forward and vomit, only then realizing that I'm lying in a pool of her blood.
So many lives, and so little time.
Creature sings. I hear the click of a button being pressed, and see a red light hovering in the darkness. The camera is recording.
Looky, looky.
Please, I rasp. The house creaks and groans as it steps forward, and my body scrambles backward on its own accord. Please.
Wouldn't you like to see something spooky?
I live in Rio de Janeiro. My apartment is right next to a dangerous favela. Drug dealers from different gangs are constantly at war in my area. One night, I was sound asleep. I am a deep sleeper, so most things don't wake me up. This particular night, a huge explosion shook me from my slumber. Wide awake in my bed, I was trying to process what I heard. Gunshots were pretty common in my area, but this was no gunshot. I thought maybe this was a grenade. Chills ran down my spine. In Brazil, criminals use weapons that other countries would normally use for war. If this was a gang fight, it was a serious one. I tried to calm down and think logically. First, I slid off my bed and onto the floor. By staying low, I would likely avoid any stray bullets. I began crawling on the floor like a soldier. I crawled into my kitchen, where there were more walls to protect me. As I crawled, gunshots rang out. They sounded so close. Even though I was scared, this situation really didn't surprise me. The news had been filled with gang-related conflicts. I personally once saw a mother dying while protecting her son from gunshots. Another time I saw criminals breaking into houses and taking hostages. I crawled from my kitchen to my front door to lock it. I stayed crouched on the ground, waiting for the sounds to pass. All of a sudden, I noticed something that sent a shiver through my spine. My doorknob started to turn ever so slowly. Whoever was opening my door clearly didn't want to be noticed. I swallowed hard. An eternity seems to pass by. Horrible thoughts passed through my head. Maybe I didn't lock the door all the way? What will happen if he gets in? Luckily, after the knob turned, the door didn't budge. I then heard footsteps retreating away. The gunshots also stopped. After a couple of minutes, I got the courage to tiptoe to the peephole. Looking out, I saw two guys in my corridor. They were wearing regular clothes and didn't seem to have any guns. They were clearly trying to open my neighbor's door. Out of nowhere, one of the guys turned his head towards my door. He shouted, "There's someone in there." The other guy pointed towards my door and said, "Open up, we're undercover police." A pit formed in my stomach. What if they were telling the truth? I wasn't going to take any chances. I yelled, "Is this about the shootouts?" After a while, one of them answered, "Yeah, we just wanted to see if you're okay." I moved my trembling hand toward the lock. I was about to open it. I then yelled, "I'm okay." The guy said, "But we need to come in. We need to teach you how to protect yourself if this happens again." I said, "There's no need to." I ran back to my bedroom and after a while returned to sleep. That following morning, I heard some commotion in my hallway. I saw journalists, people crying, and police in front of my neighbor's unit. Soon after, medics came out with my neighbor on a stretcher all bloody. I shivered and sweat profusely at the sight. Turns out the guys were robbers. They came to a party at my apartment. After the party, they went around trying to rob people. The shootout ended up being unrelated to the robbers. The creepy thing is, if that shootout didn't happen, my door would have been open and they would have come in. I felt bad for my neighbor, but it could have been me on that stretcher. I don't know his name. I don't know his age. I don't know where he lives, and I certainly don't know how to find him. All that I know is that he's dangerous, and he's on the move. I'm a government employee. I work in a research lab that develops experimental weaponry, primarily of the biological variety. I don't want to say too much more than that, as this is already at massive risk of exposing my identity. But I will say that I'm not exactly an intern. I've seen things. I've studied things. I've created things. I created him, or better put, I recreated him. Confused? I don't blame you. If you're reading this, then you're well aware of the concept of legends and mythology. Things that feed on our collective imaginations to grow more powerful, that live on our tongues as we utter their names and speak their stories, growing and evolving until they become a force of their own. Unstoppable. Unforgettable. The man with the red notepad is one of them. I'm not positive, but I think his legend began in an email chain from the late 90s. You know the type. Forward this to 20 people in the next hour, or some asshole is going to hack you to pieces with an axe. Except his went a little differently. In his, he would find his victims and draw them. Sometimes he would draw them drowning to death. Other times he would draw them wasting away in a hospital bed. And other times, he would draw them being cut open and pulled apart. It was a coin toss what version of the internet myth you'd encounter, but all of them had one thing in common. He would draw you, and you would die. The thing about the man, though, was that his sketches were thorough. It wasn't enough to simply make a stick figure labeled Sally and have that stick figure being impaled by a flagpole. No, in his sketches, Sally was a detailed work of art, with immaculate shading, perfect lines. His sketches would take hours. Sometimes they would take days. It was only after he had finished his sketches and signed them with his messy initials that the death sentence would trigger. When I received the assignment, I laughed. Give life to a legend? I remember saying to my boss. You know April Fool's was 6 months ago, right? She wasn't laughing though. I remember the way she took a deep breath, straightened her blouse, and sat down in the chair across from me. I remember the steeple of her fingers, the nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth, and the smell of cheap coffee gently steaming on the table between us. Fear, she said carefully, is a weapon more powerful than bullets and bombs. We need that right now. That was 6 years ago. I've grown since then, mentally and physically. So has the man. He started life in a test tube, shapeless and helpless. Before long, though, he was walking, talking, and after not much longer than that, he was killing. At first it was prisoners, people we'd pulled from black sites. We'd sit both of them in a lab we called the Red Room, a prisoner chained, and the man behind a plexiglass divider. He'd draw them, and they would die. Sometimes they'd catch fire. Other times they'd break out in hives, scratch their own skin bloody, and flay themselves alive. Always, though, they would die. Needless to say, he never had access to the notepad unless the experiments were running. In the time between, he'd sit alone in his small cell, hunched over in the corner with his head down. I suppose I couldn't blame him. With only a thin mattress, a bowl to shit and piss in, and 2 meals a day, there wasn't much else for him to do. We kept 2 cameras pointed at him at the front of the room just in case, monitoring the man at all times. We even made sure to cycle the guards. On the off chance, he managed to coax one into becoming sympathetic. Hell, thanks to some clever genetic work on the part of my science team, he rarely even needed showers. So he was virtually always under lock and key. We took steps, is what I'm saying. We covered our bases. Despite it all, though, he escaped. I got the call last week, and when my boss broke the news, at first, I called bullshit. It wasn't possible. Nobody escaped the facility. Hell, I remember the day it had first opened, when I was still a young man with stars and stripes in my eyes, and fantasies of helping my country defeat the bad guys. I remember the contractor who'd overseen the construction, a round and hairy man with breath like garlic sausage and the fingers to match. He'd called the facility state-of-the-art, proudly boasting that Sherlock Holmes couldn't break out of here. And yet the man was gone. Not only was he gone, but he had left a bloodbath in his wake. All in all, there were over 10 security personnel dead. One of the guards was found outside the man's cell, her skull cracked open and brain matter gently oozing from the fracture. Another was found in the camera control room, a bottle of Drano at his side and vomit covering his chest. Another was a personal friend of mine and head of the overnight guard detail, and he was found draped over the woman who ran the front desk, a bullet in both of their brains. It was horrifying and mystifying all at once. How could this have happened? The man's cell was entirely enclosed and didn't allow him to see any of our personnel. The most it had was a tiny slot on the bottom that we passed food through, and he passed his shit and piss through. Each week, when we'd retrieve him for our experiments, we'd even dispatch personnel to scrub the room and ensure he wasn't drawing on any of the surfaces. Of course, we tried consulting the camera footage, but the cameras had been disabled during his escape. There was nothing. He was just gone. A few hours after the escape, I got a call from the IT department. They'd been going back through old footage of the man, trying to determine if there was some hint of what was to come, something that might indicate exactly what had happened. They showed me footage of the man in his cell, and it looked like the same routine I'd seen 1,000 times before. He sat in the far corner with his head down, silently waiting for his next meal or bowel movement. There was the sound of a latch opening, followed by a woman's voice calling the man to supper. And then a covered plate of food slid across the floor. The man shifted, getting up to retrieve the plate. When he did, I saw it. A tapestry of red was written upon his flesh, detailed and intricate, markings covering his stomach that looked to have been carved by the edge of a fingernail. He quickly readjusted his shirt, taking care to tuck it back into his waistband. My jaw dropped in stunned silence. "Can you play back the footage with his shirt up?" I said quietly. "But take a still capture and zoom in." The IT technician nodded and did so. That's when it all came together. The markings in the man's flesh were his escape plan, his sketches. Each one an immaculate carving of the facility's guards, each one a piece of the puzzle. One showed a guard unlocking the man's cell, then caving in her own skull with a heavy steel door. Another had a guard disabling the cameras and then swallowing drain cleaner. The last sketch was of the man I knew, the head of the nighttime guard detail. It pictured him shooting and killing 7 other security personnel and then turning his sidearm on himself. There was also another sketch. I recognized that face as well, and my heart sank momentarily before realizing the subject of the sketch was still alive. She was a secretary in our archives, a young woman who had tragically lost her arm in a traffic collision 2 months ago. She hadn't been back to work yet, but it pictured her burning down the archives and all the local research we had of the man before walking into the flames herself. In the man's flesh, though, she still had 2 arms. My mind turned, and I realized how the man had pulled it all off. It was in the time between experiments. It was during the walks we'd take to the Red Room. While he made his way along the corridors and chains, he'd catalog faces, features. He'd store them away in his memory, taking care to notice small details of their schedules. He'd grown up here, after all, spent years in the facility. He had plenty of time to grow familiar. At first, my boss refused to believe it. She argued that he never indicated any such capability in the email chains we'd pulled his legend from, that he'd always needed his red notepad, and once he had it, he needed the subjects present to sketch them. It was, of course, our mistake to forget that legends evolve. Now, that mistake has cost people their lives. I see it in the news reports. They're easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. But I know the man is on the move, and he's killing again. The facility and the government refuse to comment on it. They refuse to come clean about the things we're doing and the danger the public is in. My boss died 2 days ago. The day before that, a member of my research team passed away. The day before that, 2 other members died. I'd probably be dead myself if I hadn't seen the writing on the wall and taken one of my fingers off. So now I'm taking matters into my own hands. I'm raising the alarm to you, the public. The man with the red notepad is out there. He may be sketching you. You might not even see him doing it. Maybe he'll just say hello to you in passing. Maybe he'll just take a memory. But if you do catch somebody looking at you a little too carefully or glancing your way before putting pen to paper, then it's time to run. It's time to run and maybe leave a finger behind for good measure. Serial killers worldwide are connected by a hidden website, the dark web. Where do I even begin? Well, it all started for me during my sophomore year at college. I was an introvert and kept to myself. My anxiety was always an issue for me. Weed was the best remedy. It kept me sane. It allowed me to function normally in society. Without it, I don't know how I would operate. Unfortunately, weed was illegal at the time. About once a week, I had to go to this sketchy drug dealer's house to get my supply. His name was Chase. All the homes in his neighborhood either had boarded up windows or bars on them. I usually walked to Chase's house, since it was only 5 minutes from my dorm. One particular day, I walked to his house to pick up an ounce of weed. It was a gloomy winter day. During this particular walk, I felt this ominous feeling in the air, almost as if I knew something bad was going to happen. I passed this rundown house that I always thought was abandoned. To my surprise, someone was staring at me from one of the shattered windows. His appearance was rough. He had dirt all over his face and wore a tattered white beater. I made eye contact with him. He started to smile at me with these crazy eyes. I quickly picked up my pace and started jogging. I knocked on Chase's door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway, and I wasn't taking any chances with the crazy guy outside, so I just helped myself in. After opening the door, I knew something was wrong. All the lights were off, and it was eerily silent. Suddenly, I heard Chase yell, "Hands up!" The lights turned on, and Chase was pointing an AK-47 at me. He said, "Jesus, kid, I almost shot you. You can't just come in like that, especially after..." Angry and frightened, I yelled, "What the hell, man? Especially after what?" He stopped and said, "Oh, it's nothing. Your weed is right here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a Ziploc bag with the weed inside. Outside of the house, I heard a car accelerating around a corner. The tires were screeching. Chase yelled, "Get down!" I dropped to the floor. Next thing I knew, bullets were flying into the house from the car driving by. Then silence. We stayed on the floor motionless for the next hour. When it felt safe, I called my friend to pick me up and got the hell out of there. The police never even showed up. That's how bad this area was. I promised myself I would never buy drugs in person again, not after that experience. A few weeks went by, and I was itching to buy more weed. My friend suggested I try the dark web. He said it was easy to do, and it would ship right to my dorm. A few online tutorials later, I was buying my first gram of weed on the dark web. 1 week later, the drugs came vacuum sealed inside of a box. Quickly, I jumped on my computer and ordered more. Months went by, and I never had any issues. One night, I just couldn't fall asleep. I hopped on my desktop and logged onto the dark web marketplace I used. I began scrolling past different weed strains to the more hardcore drugs. I knew I'd never buy them, but it was interesting seeing all the stuff you could actually buy. I kept scrolling, looking through the endless possibilities. Most people only think you can buy drugs on the dark web, but this marketplace had boats, planes, and cars for pennies on the dollar, all most likely stolen. But nonetheless, it was cool to scroll through. I finally stopped my nightly search, turned off my computer, and prepared for bed. While clearing my bed, I glanced back at my computer. It was still on. I thought to myself, I swore I powered it down. Maybe not. It was a long day. Probably just a brain glitch. As I approached my computer, it showed the same dark web screen as before. Right before closing out of the browser, I noticed something odd. The top of the screen had a banner ad on it. It was a picture of a bowl of cereal. Next to the bowl of cereal was a handgun. The price said $9,999.99. This whole thing struck me as bizarre, almost as an impossibility. There aren't supposed to be any advertisements on the dark web. My curiosity took over me. I couldn't just leave it alone. I had to click on the ad. The page brought me to a generic login screen. It didn't have any title or anything. It just asked for a username and password. Right before giving up, I just typed admin for both the username and password and clicked login. To my shock, it said success, and the page loaded in front of me. When the page fully loaded, I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. The site had 3 tabs at the top of the screen. The tab on the left said profiles, the one in the middle said current tasks, and the tab on the far right said live auction. Curious, I clicked on the profile tab first. Almost immediately, my screen was filled with people's faces. I clicked on an older gentleman's face. Immediately, a more detailed profile opened. Below his picture was his name, age, current address, habits, difficulty, and reward. His name was Gary. He was 56 years old. Under the habits section, it read, Gary walks his dogs exactly at 9 a.m. in his neighborhood. He walks them later in the day at 3 p.m. and one last time at 9 p.m. before bed. Every Saturday, he goes to the local grocery store at 11 a.m. Under difficulty, it said, easy. Lastly, the reward was listed at $14,000. I closed out of his profile. I didn't know what to think. I wondered what the reward was for. Was this a human trafficking site? It couldn't be, because the profiles were mostly males. I became more intrigued by the second. I clicked on the live auction tab. The page looked like any other chat room. There were usernames on the sidebars. A quick glance at the usernames made me uneasy. Serial Killer 23, Hitman John, Cleanup Crew 2, and Killing Spree, just to name a few. Those were the ones that stood out as odd. Others were relatively normal. A picture began to load in front of me. The picture was of a man who looked to be in his mid-30s. Below his picture were the same details as before on the profile tab. It had his name, age, address, habits, difficulty, and reward. His name was Pete. He was 36. Under habits, it said every day Pete drives to get his morning coffee at 8 a.m. Next to difficulty, it said hard, and that Pete was likely armed as he was a member of the NRA. Right next to his picture, a dollar amount loaded. It said, starting at $40,000. Messages began flooding in. Hitman John messaged, I will end that guy for $30,000. Cleanup Crew 2 chimed in and said, I will do it for $25,000. A user by the name of Raining Death said, I'll do it for $20,000, and I won't leave a mess like Cleanup Crew 2 did last time. Cleanup Crew 2 quickly responded, well, my last contract was an ex-KGB agent, so not the easiest guy to finish off. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This was a site for serial killers and hitmen, or this was the sickest joke of all time. For a while, nobody said a word in the chat. Someone with a username of moderator said, anyone have a better bid? Going once, going twice. The contract is sold to Raining Death. The moderator then typed, "Since this is a tougher client, I will allow you 2 weeks to finish the deed." Some time passed. The moderator typed in the chat, "Moderator 2, I see you're in the room. Please take over and handle the next few auctions." I went on the sidebar and scrolled down. Moderator 2 was highlighted for some reason. I typed the letter F into the chat box out of curiosity. The username Moderator 2 popped up next to the chat box. I realized I was Moderator 2. My heart dropped. What if I closed my computer and just logged out? Maybe they would track me down. How did a serial killer site have such a vulnerability where admin works for the username and password? Someone made a serious mistake if this site was legitimate. I played along. I responded in the chat, "Sounds good, I will take over." The next profile that automatically loaded in the auction was an older guy with a beard, age 65, gets the morning paper at 10 a.m., difficulty level easy. The starting bid is $15,000. Cleanup Crew 2 quickly typed, "I'll do it for $10,000. Seniors are my specialty." Nobody else responded. I didn't know what to do. I right-clicked Cleanup Crew 2's username. It had a few options: ban, mute, and assign task. I didn't want to be responsible for killing anyone. I right-clicked my own name and clicked assign. Another option came up for allowed time. I put in 1 year and clicked OK. Messages began flooding the chat room. Raining Death said, "A moderator isn't supposed to assign himself to a person. That's not how the system is set up." Cleanup Crew 2 typed, "And a 1-year contract? This guy isn't a politician. Something is up with this Moderator 2 guy. I've never seen this happen before." Hitman John replied, "Definitely an undercover. Quick, get Moderator 3 in the room to fix this now." My stomach dropped, and anxiety flooded my body in anticipation of what was to come. A notification popped up that Moderator 3 joined the room. Serial Killer 23 typed, "Moderator 2 is an imposter. Delete him from the site and fry his PC." Moderator 3 said, "Working on it." Moderator 3 responded, "Haha, the IP pings to a college. His name is Dylan Reeves. Here is a picture." I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless. My whole body was shaking. Messages began filling the chat. Serial Killer 23 typed, "I'll end him for $500. Raining Death replied, "I'll do it for only $250. All of a sudden, my computer started glitching out. Black command prompt boxes started filling my screen, and all of a sudden my computer's power surged and everything went black. I tried turning my computer back on, but with no luck. I immediately called 911. They sent 2 special agents to my dorm the next day. I told them everything and gave them my computer. They told me they knew of the site and had been trying to access it for years. Since the incident, I've had several attempts on my life. I had to completely change my identity and move out of the country. Never go on the dark web.